Welcome, everyone, to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business owning families. And today's conversation represents our furthering in progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship from the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation, and Jay's here today with us. So thanks again, Jay. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. And today's book actually really aligns well with that. So we're really grateful to the Drucker School to have Jay and the foundation supporting us in this way. Last month, we featured Catherine Howe, a New York Times bestselling author and award-winning historian and novelist. She's the co-author with Anderson Cooper of the best-selling books Vanderbilt and Astor. Last month, we focused on the book Astor, and if you missed that conversation, we do have the recording up on our YouTube channel and on our website. So one other item before we get going here, I wanted to just share my screen briefly. We have a number of institutions that we're now working with to present our certificate in advising family enterprises. That consists of 6 modules and is delivered either in person or virtually. We are not currently offering this as an open enrollment program, but if your institution is interested in hosting a group and taking a group through that certificate program, I would love to visit with you about that. The next thing is our Generational Wealth Masterclass. I'm excited to share that we'll be taking this masterclass to a group of our friends in Uganda. And if you are interested in the Generational Wealth Masterclass, this is content that I developed with Jay Hughes. Again, please shoot me an email, and we're working now on different partnerships to bring that content to the world. Now on to the star of the show. I'd like to introduce you to my friend David York. David is the author of The Gift of Lift, which I have right here, Harnessing the Power of Stewardship to Elevate the World. He's the founder of the law firm York Howell in Salt Lake City. He's also a multi-time author and founder of a SaaS company called Chronology, which is focused on connecting people with purpose. I am not sure how David has found time to do all these things, but he's made time for us today. So we're going to take advantage of that and talk to him about his book, The Gift of Lift. David, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, absolutely. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
So as I went through your book, I mean, there's so many different gems in there. That we're for sure not going to do the book justice today, but we're going to skim the surface and hopefully encourage people to take a deep dive. This is a book that I'm probably going to need to read 3 or 4 times, honestly, and ponder and take lots of notes on. But I feel like one of the main topic is that of stewardship. Can you talk about what stewardship is, and then also maybe what stewardship is not?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, answering that question was the genesis of writing the book to begin with. And we use that word fairly ubiquitously. I think more so today than even in the past. And we use it from a family context, a business context, certainly from environmental context, social context, and yet oftentimes it can mean a fairly nebulous, general, greater duty or responsibility. I will say this: it's not ownership, and I think sometimes we confuse ownership and stewardship, but it's far bigger than just ownership. It's not about you. That's one of the key elements, is that it's not singular. It's by its nature larger and grander. And honestly, to a certain extent, it's not achievable. Uh, Stewardship is a direction, it's not a destination.
Pursuit.
And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
pursuit. Yeah.
it's more of an aspirational pursuit, and it's our temporary engagement in a lasting endeavor. So it's got a much broader element to it.
That can be frustrating for some though, David. We like our measurable goals, right? That we can say, check, we arrived. And stewardship might be frustrating for some to say, well, if I can never arrive, should I even pursue it?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and I honestly I do think that that is something that limits us in many respects because we attempt to achieve that which is achievable, right? And who would seek out to achieve something that can't be achieved? And yet, the greatest accomplishments in the world have happened over time, and they've happened with a multitude of different people. And I think sometimes our problem is that we don't. It's not that we dream too big; it's that we dream too small, and then we have too small of a perspective. But I do think that there is that knee jerk reaction against trying to do something that's bigger than yourself, because to a certain extent you're setting yourself up for some level of personal failure.
Yeah. So one of the things that helped me to understand kind of where you're coming from with your own thoughts on stewardship is this story that you share about your friend Gail Miller, the former steward of the Utah Jazz. Would you tell us that story and maybe what impact that story had on you in your own view of stewardship?
Yeah, and I've been fortunate enough to work with her for the last 11 years. She's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. She's definitely a role model to me in my life. And we were working on a structure to keep the Jazz in the state of Utah long term. For those of you who are familiar with Utah, at least when it comes to sports, right now we're kind of a one horse town. We've got aspirations to bring other sports teams here, but the Utah Jazz are certainly one of the biggest rallying cries in the state. And so she wanted to create a structure that would ensure, whether it's her or someone else, that the team stay in the state indefinitely, because it's just such a meaningful thing for us. And so we were in the process of working on that, and I asked her just kind of offhandedly. I said, "How will it feel to no longer own the Jazz?" And she casually looked up at the documents that we had been reviewing, and she said, "Well, I don't own the Jazz." Now you got to realize this is one of the smartest clients I've ever worked with, and but I'm still an estate planner at heart, and so I kind of stopped and I said, "Well, actually, you do own the Jazz. I wanted to make sure that there's no question here." And I'll never forget, she stopped what she was doing. She looked up at me and she said, "No, I'm a steward of the Jazz." And in that moment, it was one of the most powerful professional moments of my life, because I saw someone who had transcended ownership. I mean, I think so often in our culture, in our society, we kind of think of ownership as the pinnacle, as the top. And here she had a perspective that was transcendent of ownership. She saw herself as a steward of this asset. And I think one of the things that people come to realize is that if we're not careful, everything that we think we own actually owns us back.
Say more about
And
that. Say more about
yeah,
that.
yeah, you see this, whether it's possessions, whether it's property, whether it's businesses, organizations, these things that we think we own, we end up serving and being controlled by, and ultimately a form of servitude to these things that we think that we own. And here I saw someone who was completely free from that. And what I came to realize is you're not owned by anything when you're only owned by your purpose. In
Hmm.
other words, she did not own the jazz to own the jazz. That was a means to an end. Her purpose was to serve the community. And so she was able to take a stewardship role because her purpose was the community. In fact, that's what enabled her a couple of years later to transfer to another steward who would take care of the community because it wasn't about that ownership. And so I saw really a counterintuitive freedom and even a richness that came from something that was not the opposite of ownership, but a step beyond ownership, and that was this stewardship mindset.
Yeah, I love it. Um, it takes so much, you know, thoughtfulness to figure out how to be a steward and how to position your time and your talents and your treasure to actually accomplish. And again, it's maybe it's not accomplished because it's to pursue that end. In the book, you offer up some equations that I think are really helpful. One of those was investment plus transcendence equals stewardship. Can you tell us a little bit about that equation and maybe break down the parts and pieces for us?
Yeah, even though I like to try to wax eloquent or sound like that, the reality is I'm still an accountant at heart. I still go to spreadsheets for the answers to most of life's problems. So
Math
I
is a
like
safe place.
exactly. So I'm sure there's some problem in the world that can't be solved by a spreadsheet. I don't know what it is, but there's got to be something. But at the same time, as I was wrestled with this definition, what is a steward? What I came to the realization is that a steward is someone who is fully invested in something bigger than themselves. And so they have these twin elements of investment and transcendence. And what's interesting is it's one of those where the sum of those two is more than additive. It's multiplicative or logarithmic, right? 1 plus 1 equals 3, in the sense that when you have deep, rich investment and you create a high level of transcendence, sorry, the combination of those two is just incredibly powerful, and it actually feeds on each other. So, as an example, I was able to a couple of years ago go to a winery in just outside of Verona, and it was a fifth generation winery. They were raising the sixth generation at this winery, and I asked them. I said, "What's the secret of a 5 generation family business?" And the daughter who was running the business, she said, "It's one word." And so I kind of raced through my mind, what's this word? Is it love? Is it family? Is it wine? Like, what's the word? And she said that the secret is passion. But then I'll never forget how she described it. She said, it's a beautiful work, but it's also very hard. So you have to look up and see the beauty and look down and do the work. And what she was describing was stewardship and those twin elements. For them, the transcendence is the beauty. They do this because it's a beautiful work. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful product, everything about it. But that beauty creates deep engagement. They put their head down. It's very hard work. And they have a dedication to the land. They make changes to the land that they'll see benefits from in 20, 30, 40 years, because they're not looking at the next quarter. They're looking at the next quarter century. And because they have that long-term mindset and because of the beauty, they're deeply invested. That deep investment makes everything more beautiful. That
Yeah.
increased beauty creates a deeper level of engagement. So it's this kind of upward spiral, if you will, in the sense that the two of them work together to magnify the benefit of the other.
And when you talk about investment, you're talking about it could be their sweat, it could be their money, it could be their creativity that they're bringing to the project that they're working on. Is that kind of what you mean by investment?
Exactly. Yeah. It's, I'm AAA, all about alliteration. And so it's that time, talent, treasure, right? It's the investment or engagement of your time. It's the investment of your skills, your abilities, your knowledge, your know-how, and then it's your financial. And I do think sometimes we emphasize the financial. I actually think so often that's a lag. It's not a lead indicator of investment. I think time is probably the best correlator to investment. What do you spend your time on? And then your skills and abilities, and then money. But yes, all three of those are elements of investment.
Well, I think it's interesting because we all look at the challenge of generational wealth, and perhaps the greatest challenge is that when you have a generation that either hasn't been encouraged to be invested, encouraged to invest, and 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 there's maybe a generation before that said, you don't need to do all the things that I did, uh, just enjoy your life.
Yeah.
And as good as that sounds, it's so stifling to so many. At least that's what I've observed.
Yeah, I've been doing estate planning now for 27 years, and the one thing that I've learned is that we value things based on what they cost us. And the vast majority of my clients have earned their wealth through hard work, risk, stress, sleepless nights, worry. As a result, they highly value what they've accumulated because it cost them a lot.
Yeah.
What does wealth help you to avoid? It helps you to avoid hard work, risk, stress, sleepless nights, worry, right? And the problem is, I can transfer the financial resources. That's easy. I can't transfer the cost that comes with it. And unfortunately, cost is correlative to value. We were talking about this just before, but there's a video making the rounds from the NVIDIA CEO, Jensen Huang, and he was talking about suffering. And he was talking to a group at Stanford and how he wished them suffering. And there was kind of this nervous laughter in the crowd, like, you're joking. He wasn't joking at all. He was talking about cost, sacrifice, and suffering. And really what he's talking about is investment and cost to bring value to something. But yes, I think we live in a culture today that is pretty reticent to any form of suffering. Suffering is a bad thing, and I'm not a fan of suffering for the sake of suffering. But sometimes we can take things too far, and we try to make things so easy, and we don't realize that we actually are undercutting the value when we do that.
So when you use this phrase, the benefit of costs, can you say more about the benefits of cost? You've talked about it a little bit, but you share a few of those benefits.
Yeah, and there's a great book by Nassim Taleb called "Skin in the Game," and he talks about this concept, the value of cost. Cost is really valuable for a couple of reasons. One is it helps us to understand what we value. I was walking through the mall with my daughter when she was like 18 at the time, and she saw a shirt in the window that she really liked. And she's like, "Oh, Dad," she said, "I like that shirt." And I said, "Well, you have money." I said, "You can buy that shirt." And she said, "I don't like it my money that much. I just like it your money that much."
That's
What she
awesome.
was saying is, I don't value that shirt enough for it to come at a personal cost. I would take it if you would give it to me, but I don't want it to personally cost me anything. And there've been studies that show that even with cash, just transferring cash creates a pain to giving cash that credit cards don't.
Yeah.
And there are actually some brands now that are figuring out how to make it more difficult to buy their product, more difficult to acquire it or pay for it, because that cost actually increases the perceived value of what it is that you're receiving. And so one of the problems I think with inherited wealth is that by and large it's costless.
Yeah.
What we say to the next generation is we're gonna transfer resources to you that cost you nothing, and we're gonna give no meaning and purpose behind it, and then we're gonna be shocked when you consume it. The average American inheritance is consumed in 18 months. What people accumulate over the course of their life is on average consumed by the next generation in 18 months. Even among the highest net worth, there have been studies that have shown that the average half-life is 8 years. So take what you have, cut it in half every 8 years. That's on average what happens with inherited wealth. And by and large, I think it's because it's a costless wealth. And so it's a valueless one.
Yeah, that makes sense. In the book, you talk about a few groups. You talk about consumers, dreamers, and owners. Can you describe those groups and maybe some of the traits they have, but also some of the destinations that they should expect to end up at as a consumer, a dreamer, or an owner?
Yeah, so if we take our classic four-box model to understand the world, right? If we say someone who has transcendence and investment, they're in this upper right quadrant called stewards. They're fully invested in something bigger than themselves. What happens when one or both of those elements is missing? So if we go to the opposite, if there's a lack of investment, there's a lack of transcendence, then those are what I call consumers. And the consumer is someone who there's no investment and there's nothing bigger than themselves. And I think sometimes I have clients who worry about a consumer mentality to inherited wealth. And so they seek to put limitations or restrictions on how funds can go. The opposite of consumerism isn't just less consumerism. That's just minimalism or a form of consumerism. The opposite of consumerism is stewardship. And so when we try to titrate how little can I give without doing harm, we're still within this concept of consumerism. And it's by and large, it's demonstrated by that hedonic treadmill, right? That desire for current happiness. So it's a very short-term, present situation. It's very self-focused and self-intentioned, and it seeks happiness as its highest form of engagement. And you're either happy or you're not happy, and you work towards getting back to those moments of happiness. Happiness is achieved through consumption, but it's very hard to maintain. If you have investment, or I'm sorry, you have transcendence, you have something that's bigger than yourself, but you lack that investment, you have what I call dreamers. So those are people who see the world as it should be. They see something that is bigger, but they either can't invest because they don't have the resources. They won't invest because that comes with cost and pain and sacrifice. Or most tragically, they're never asked to invest. And unfortunately, I see this a lot of times, especially with clients who went through their own form of suffering or difficulty or struggle. They think part of the benefit of their wealth is to help their family avoid pain, cost, and suffering, but they're undercutting. And then sometimes for dreamers is sometimes, honestly, they're people who care about too much or care about too many things. So sometimes for dreamers, it's about, instead of changing everything, what could we change in more meaningful, impactful everyday lives? It would be great to change the entire educational system what can I do for the fourth grade class that's in my neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
On the other side, you have owners. Owners are the people who are all in. They are fully invested. They're if you want time, talent, treasure, they're the ones who are there pouring that in. But ultimately, it's not about anything bigger than themselves. It's about what can be achieved. And one of the problems with things that can be achieved is that they're achieved. And then what's next?
Yeah,
Um,
you see this with, I mean, you see this with a business owner that sells their business and then flounders because
yes.
their business was their purpose, it was their relationships, it was their identity, and it's one of the saddest things to witness. Um, I cut you off. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, no. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, we sometimes deep engagement can mask transcendence. It can look like you're doing something bigger, but you're really not. And the problem is, it comes to an end. That's why, you know, some studies show as upwards of 70% of business owners regret selling their business within a year of the sale. It's because it was their purpose, it was their transcendence, but it went away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because these are the doers, accomplishers,
Mhm.
achievers of the world, but that lack of transcendence creates a temporariness that ultimately leads to a form of despondence or depression or lack of fulfillment.
So I want our audience today to be careful to not just look outside and point fingers at dreamers, point fingers at owners, point fingers at consumers. I want for our group here on this call today to look at yourself, look at myself, and say in what way are dreamer characteristics showing up? In what way are consumer characteristics showing up for me? David, I know that one of the questions I'm asking myself all the time is what's the ratio look like for me today? Consumption versus creation. And it's directly correlated to my happiness. If I'm not creating something, whether it's writing something or developing something, if I've spent too much time on my phone, too much time on the TV, I don't feel good about myself. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a good way just to check in on ourselves, that creation versus consumption measure. But you've given us a ton to think about here.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. And one other nuance, because again, to me, stewardship is not about the CEO of a $1 billion company. Teachers can be stewards, stay-at-home parent can be a steward. Anyone can have a stewardship mentality. Being all in about something bigger than yourself is it can be a universal condition. But one of the things to emphasize what you're saying is we show up differently in certain circumstances. We
Yeah,
might be a steward in our professional life and a consumer at home, or a
that's brutal.
consumer,
That's
yeah, or
brutal.
or a consumer in our faith group or our local school or community. So we may have an owner mentality in some things or a dreamer mentality in others, and so we don't just show up as one in one context. We live in different environments, and I think it's a good sub question to ask ourselves: is, am I being a steward of my family? Am I being a steward of the organizations I serve in? Am I just being a consumer at my job? So yes, I think we can actually be we can be a steward, a consumer, an owner, and a dreamer all at one time in four different circumstances of our lives.
And I would just emphasize, like, these questions are not to beat ourselves up and to just show ourselves how lacking we are as people. It's just to have an alertness and an awareness to the fact that we are making choices, we are investing our time, our talents, and our treasures in certain ways. And if that is unfulfilling to us, we get a chance to change. That's the beauty of these tough questions, to me, David.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely, and that's the great thing is when you take on something that bigger than yourself. and that can happen at any point in your life. And it actually, to a certain level, takes the pressure off too, right? I mean, there's a certain freedom in attempting to move the ball forward in an otherwise unachievable goal, because you can actually achieve that.
Well, I mean, if you take our society is filled with comparison. You know, if you take a stewardship mentality, you're probably not doing as much comparing yourself to someone else in terms of measures of wealth or accolades or followers. You're if it's bigger than you, then you don't end up trapped in that cycle of comparison, which I think is really, really painful.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Do
absolutely.
you have something else to add there?
No, no, I think it also leans into not just comparison, but if we're not careful, we enter into these contractual relationships. I call it the if then model that so many of us lean into, which is if I do this, then you'll do this. Or
Yeah.
if I do this, then this will happen to me. So if I go and get a degree, then I will get a great job. If I do this extra work at the office, then I'll get a promotion. If I do this for my spouse, then they'll do this for me. Or if I do this for my children, then they will turn out this way, right? We create these contracts that oftentimes people don't even know that they've entered into with us. And then it all becomes, to your point earlier, about expectations.
Yeah.
And then expectations are met, and at most we're satisfied because we just got our expectations, or they're not met, and now we're frustrated, angry, or
Yeah.
dissatisfied.
So in the book, you talk about those if then contracts, but then you offer us something more that a steward enters into these because therefore type conversation. Can you give us some examples of those? Because I think that's kind of mind opening as well.
Yeah, like I said, so many times we enter into these if then contractual relationships. With stewards, they think different. They enter into because therefore they live in a because therefore model. Because I value this, therefore I'll do this. So for them, the driver is not the outcome, it's the transcendence. Because I value compassion, therefore this is how I will act towards this person or this circumstance. Because I value creativity, therefore this is what I'm going to do to express that creativity or generosity. So for them, the driver is the transcendence, and the therefore is the investment. Because the Caperso Winery values beauty, therefore we will engage in a 20-year, they were in the midst of a 20-year project to improve the health of the soil. And it's a very different model, and it's a very different mindset, because in this situation, the value drives the action. And the engine is meaning, and the destination is open-ended. But it always occurs. You know, if I said today, because I value compassion with everyone I interact with, I'm going to act with compassion. You know what's going to happen? Compassion. And it's going to add to the compassion of the world. It actually will always fulfill itself in a because therefore model. And how that might look, how that might be expressed might be different. But honestly, it also makes decisions a lot easier. I worked with a family business, and they decided that they wanted to be known for three things. They wanted to be known with loyalty with each other and who they worked with. They wanted to be known for integrity in everything they did, and they wanted to be known for excellence. Now, unfortunately, the acronym was LIE, but set that aside for just a second, right?
We
Loyalty,
won't get caught up
integrity,
on
and
that.
yeah, exactly. So that afternoon, they wit was one that could generate a good cash flow, look good on a spreadsheet, which I love, but it was geographically remote. It was going to take a lot of work and effort. And they were kind of hemming and hawing, but we had just gone through this exercise. So I asked them, I said, let me ask you this. Can you do this project with excellence? And they said, done. We're not doing the deal. They said, yes, we could make some money on it. Yes, it could add to our portfolio, but ultimately we can't do the work with the excellence that we want our brand to be known for. And so we're not going to do it. So it actually became a really quick decision for them once they went through the lens of there, because we value excellence, therefore we're not doing this project because we can't do it with excellence. It was easy for them to make that decision.
All right, so we're all leaving with a homework assignment of working through that for ourselves.
Yeah.
So one of the chapters you talk about the principle of counterbalancing.
Yeah.
We're in a society that tells us that we need to live balanced lives, and there's nothing more depressing than looking at your life and really figuring out that you're totally out of balance. Can you explain what counterbalancing is and why is it relevant?
Yeah, and I think balance is one of those things that's become so overused because I'll tell you this, unfortunately, I think balance sometimes just turns into mediocrity. It's just balance just means I don't do anything exceptionally. I have to, do more, do less, and I'm trying to find some kind of equilibrium. I am much more of a fan of counterbalancing than balancing. And by counterbalancing, you take two different things that work in harmony with each other to create something better. One of the examples I use, and the only thing I know about food is how to consume it. But in the culinary arts, there's a lot of counterbalance that goes along, right? When we talk about something that's sweet, we can talk about making it sweeter or less sweet, or we could talk about adding something that's salty to it, right? What's better than caramel ice cream? Salted caramel ice cream. It's something that's very different, but in the right amount of counterbalance, the salt makes the sweet better, but the sweet makes the salt better. These are two things that actually add to one another. This is how elevators work, right? You look at how can an elevator so simply and easily move a large amount of weight? It's because there's a counterbalanced amount of weight that's working opposite to it to make that work so much better. And so for a lot of clients, what we talk about is how can we actually create not an opposing force, but a force that works together. And that's where, again, I think transcendence and investment actually work to enhance and make the two better than either one as an individual.
Right. One more question, and then I would like to open it up to the audience. Please put your questions in the chat, and I promise I won't hog all of David's time. We'll get some of your questions in here. But one of the things that I found really interesting, first of all, I'm a fanatic with questions too, and I believe that advisors are hired to ask great questions, not to provide the answers. So, just the list of questions was a huge gift for me, so thank you for that. But you talk about three critical questions that every child, every employee, every partner, every colleague should be provided an answer to. And I'll give them to you, and then I'd love just some conversation around it. The first one is, what can I expect being a part of this family, company, or group? What can I expect? The second one is, what should I not expect for being a part of this family, this group, this company, whatever? And then the third is, what is expected of me? So why are those three when paired together? Why are they so important?
Well, first, I think it's critical that if you're a part of any system, whether it's a family, a business, an organization, a nonprofit, to understand those three questions. I will tell you, in the vast majority of the families that I work with, the children don't know the answers to those three questions. And they don't know the answers to those three questions because the parents have never come up with the answers for those three questions or have communicated them. But I find that they're really powerful because they blend both rights and responsibilities. And I think you run into problems in any group, family, business, any system, when you have one in the absence of others. So when you have rights in the absence of responsibilities, you create entitlement. And we talk about entitlement in estate planning. It's, the dirty word, and we'll throw it out and call people entitled. Here's the reality. Every single one of us feels a certain level of entitlement, right? Especially as Americans, we have certain rights that we're entitled to, and we're entitled to a certain level of treatment. There's nothing wrong with a certain form of entitlement. The problem is when you have an expectation of rights in the absence of any responsibilities. By the same token, there can be systems where we only have responsibilities in the absence of any rights at all. And that actually creates a form of enslavement. So when you only have a list of things you're responsible for and you have nothing that you're entitled to, that actually creates that form of enslavement. The best systems work when you have both rights and responsibilities. And those questions are intended to flush out both of those things. In other words, what are my rights within this group? And what are my responsibilities within this group, both to myself and to others within that group? And so I think it's a really helpful, simple, yet actually very deep construct to try to understand. And I think as a subset, because obviously you work with a lot of family businesses, a lot of us work with a lot of family businesses, those are questions that probably need to be re-asked within the family business as well, right? What can I expect within the family business? What should I not expect within the family business? If I get my GED, can I become the CEO of the company? Is that an expectation I should have? And what is expected of me? So sometimes you have to answer those questions in those different systems. But I think I found it to be a really good way for clients to think through. I had one client who he loved those questions, but he said, you know what, I'm going to go back and ask my children what they think the answers to those questions are. And he said it was great because he got some things that he expected and others that he didn't. The other thing I think is so important is that when you don't have the answers to those three questions, the people in your group have the answers. They've come up with their own answers. Our brains aren't made for ambiguity. And so
it's going to close the gap.
Exactly. So we think, if we don't talk about it, if we don't say anything, then people come up with the answers, and oftentimes they're not the answers that you want. Yeah. And so I think part of the importance of answering those questions is to remove the ambiguity or the uncertainty that is actually creating problems in and of themselves. Because again, now I've just gone back to an expectation model, and I've come up with my own if-then in the system, which may not be the right if-then. And so that's why I use those with families, and it's been a great structure for people to think through how they want to answer those questions.
Yeah. Okay. We have some questions coming in the chat. Jeff Arnold, would you like to take yourself off mute and ask David your question?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. David, I've really enjoyed your book, studying it. It's been great.
Great. Thank you.
As I was listening to you first speak today, I couldn't help but think of the compounding for someone like Gail Miller, right? Of sometimes I am tempted to look at somebody that's a great steward and think they've always been like that, right? When in reality, it's been a process of change and for them in growth. And so very compounded over time of little things, right? And so my question is simply, you've met with a lot of those type of people. How have you seen that compounding realized? And then for the rest of us that are striving, what are just a couple of simple things to start with as we're starting to try to make that compound for ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think one of the things, if we're not careful, we can get discouraged or think that we lack sufficient ability to invest or sufficient resources to make a difference or move a needle. Gail and her husband Larry were great examples of that. They no college degrees, although education and learning were super important to them. Gail shares a story when she was young that in their house they had one light bulb that they moved from room to room when they made dinner, and then they moved it to the living room afterwards. So did not have much in the way of resources, but always had that steward mentality. But I think the reality is that's why I want to focus on the importance of time and talent, because time is the great equalizer. I don't care how wealthy you are, you have the same number of hours in a day that the rest of us do. And again, talent and skill set and ability is so unique and powerful. I think one of the things that keeps dreamers on the sideline is that lack of belief that they have sufficient resources to move the needle on what their transcendent goal or aspiration is. And so I think it's important to recognize that it is iterative and it is additive over time. That's why that winery in Verona, again, they've been working on that for 120 years, and they make 20-year decisions in what they do. So they have such a long-term perspective, but it manifests itself in action today. So I do think there's such an additive impact to it, and it's what I call that upward spiral. So often we talk about the downward spiral, right? But there's an upward spiral to adding these two forces together.
And I would also add to that, I think we should try to not put too much pressure on ourselves to think that our purpose is going to be permanent. If we do, then it may paralyze us from ever starting. So I think when we find something that we want to chase that is bigger than us, I think we just start running. And as our life changes, as our situation molds, as our mindset shifts, I think we have to give ourselves permission to change. Because otherwise I think it can be paralyzing for sure. It's easy to look at someone else and say, they had this transcendent purpose forever. And if they were being honest, they would probably say, I really didn't. I had this kind of opportunistic thing happen in my life that maybe changed my perspective, and then I was willing to go all in on it at some point. So I don't want any of us to come away from this call feeling like I could never do that. So
yeah,
we need to make this approachable.
Thank
you. Okay. Mercy. Actually, Steve, I saw your hand. Go ahead, Steve, and then we'll go to Mercy next.
I wasn't able to put it into writing. I have to figure this out as I say it. Hi, David. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
Good. I love your stewardship is a direction and not a destination. And I heard something this week about how in the philanthropy world, the people who want to bring in donors, they love working with the ones who earned the wealth, because they say the ones who inherit it are much less likely to part with it, because, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how to connect these two ideas around the stewardship. And I think maybe the stewardship of, yes, it's okay to give away the the assets, or do the philanthropists need to do a different kind of stewardships to allow that? I'm trying to figure out, like, this whole idea of they didn't earn it, so they had no cost. So now they don't even feel right giving it away. But something tells me that stewardship is part of the answer to sort of square that circle.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, and I think some of that too is I found some of my very wealthiest clients are the most generous. And it's a chicken and egg thing, right? Are they successful because they're generous, or are they generous because they're successful? I think a lot of there's a lot of mental, emotional, physical, spiritual benefits to generosity, which I actually think helps you be more successful. But I think part of it too is a mindset and belief in themselves that they're going to continue to earn and grow and build, and generosity is part of that. And I think some of that with the next generation is fear, worry of loss, because maybe that lack of confidence in themselves. We're seeing some interesting trends in giving too. That's a whole nother interesting topic. But I think some of that is that fear of loss and engagement, but it still leads to a form of consumption.
Yeah, I was going to say, David, I mean, that's classic creator consumer. Someone that's created probably believes more strongly that they could create again than someone that is purely set up as consuming the wealth, whether that means personally consuming the wealth or it going away. It becomes kind of this fixed pie, and that's scary. That's really scary.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's helpful, Steve. Thank you for your question. Mercy, if you are available to come online, we'd love to hear your voice and ask your question if you would.
It says she's in transit, so maybe she
in
can't.
Transit? Okay, sorry, I didn't read that whole thing. I'll read it for her. How do you create that shift as an advisor with a client away from estate planning and ticking the boxes into client advising in terms of intergenerational stewardship mentality? So from an advisor perspective, how do you help clients to make that shift?
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, I think the traditional model of estate planning, I call it the 4D model: dump, divide, defer, and dissipate, right? The vast majority of wealth transfer, we dump the money down to the next generation, divide it up equally, we try to defer any taxes, and we dissipate the wealth. But it's a consumptive model. For a lot of my clients, we focus on more of an opportunity-based model, one that fosters and encourages things like education, entrepreneurism, home ownership, charitable engagement, even family connection, all things that don't strip away the cost element. And what's interesting is you don't get a reduction in the value of cost when you leverage work. In other words, even if just the act of going out and saving money for a down payment and being responsible for a home, you can leverage the down payment, and you still get the benefit of the cost in a way that simply providing something doesn't do. And the same with education. You can leverage the benefit of education, but there's still cost in terms of attendance and work and study and effort and all of those kind of things. And so, and honestly, that was the old model of wealth transfer, was really much more opportunity based than it was ever consumption based. And so I think the key is, what elements can I not create artificial difficulty, not hey kids, I need you to see that pile of rocks on the east side of the yard, move it over to the west side, and tomorrow I'll tell you what to do, which will be to move it back from the west side to the east side, right? Creating artificial difficulty is actually unrelational. But at the same time, when we try to eliminate costs, we eliminate value. So how do we both allow for the investment by the next generation of time, talent, treasure, while realizing you can still leverage that to magnify the return of that, and you don't really undercut the value proposition.
Yeah, I like to think of this, David, as like the contribution model. And we use
Mhm.
this simple thing with my kids with clothes or shoes. I have a son who's 15 and wants new basketball shoes. Well, that's fine. I want him to have those, but I want him to have some sort of investment in those shoes because I've seen that as he puts forth an effort to mow lawns or whatever to be able to pay for a portion of those shoes, even he takes care of them differently.
Yeah.
And he feels differently about, the things that he acquires, not even when he earns it 100%, but just as you're saying, just there has to be some sort of investment. There has to be some sort of contribution so we don't rob them of what it feels like to, to be a co-investor in whatever,
Yeah. We undercut the value when we undercut the cost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any more questions? Feel free to put your virtual little hands up. We probably have time for about one other question. If there's anyone that would like to ask another question. And I have one more question for you, David. And this one, at the end of the book, I've talked about them already, but you gave us a gift of questions. Do you have a favorite that elicits meaningful conversations? My personal favorite is, what does it mean to be a York, or what does it mean to be a Specht? I love that question. I've had great experiences with that question. So that's my question for you. What question would you offer to this group? What's one of your favorites?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of questions. One of the things I try to emphasize, especially to advisors, is that data and information inform, questions and stories transform. And I think we need to get out of the information business and get into the transformation business, and that occurs through questions and stories. And I think we've got to stop this knee-jerk reaction to be the ones that give all the answers. So I love questions. I've got a list of them. If you have a resource on this, I'll send you, Dave. I've got the questions as a standalone that people can take and go through and answer on their own. My favorite question this week is a new one. And so I'm stealing it from Jensen Huang from his conversation. But here's the question I'd love everyone to spend a little time answering is, what are you willing to suffer for? Because at the end of the day, that will tell you what you value in a way that few other things would. But what would you be willing to suffer for? And so as we were talking today, I wrote that one down. So now I got to sit down and answer that one myself. But that's my question.
Perfect. Well, our time has flown, David. I really appreciate you investing an hour with us. We're all better for it. If you haven't gone out to purchase the book, make that investment in yourself. If for nothing else, the questions in the back that will cause you to think and reflect and maybe make some changes. For our audience, next month on Authors at Drucker, we'll hear from my friend Richie Norton about his book, Anti-Time Management: Reclaiming Your Time, Revolutionizing Your Results with Time Tipping. So I'm really excited about that conversation, and just appreciate all of you for investing your time. Thank you again for joining us at Authors at Drucker, and make it a great day.
Thanks, Dave.